When Israel was overwhelmed on October 7th, it had no response in its strategic arsenal other than disproportionate force, which happened to be directed against its own population.
ואנחנו פורצים ליישוב, לוקחים תנופה עם הטנק, שוברים את השער הצהוב ומתחילים לדהור לכיוון ההכוונות עם הכוונות ידיים של אותו חייל, והוא מצביע לי לטור ואומר לי, תראי לשם פגז, יש שם מחבלים. אני שואלת אותו בחזרה, יש שם אזרחים? הוא אומר לי, לא יודע, תראי לשם פגז. אני מחליטה לא לראות לשם פגז, אנחנו מדברים על יישוב ישראלי. אני יורה אש מקלעים לכניסה של הבית.
אנחנו בעצם נלחמים בתוך חולית, יש שם גם אש מהמטעים מבחוץ, גם אש בפנים, הטנק מבצע ירי גם מקלעים וגם פגזים, גם בתוך היישוב. בעצם לחימה מאוד מורכבת. המחבלים לא נלחמו בטנק, הם נלחמו וכשהגיעו הטנק הם או ברחו או מתו והם הרגו עשרות מחבלים.
באיזשהו שלב העלו אותנו באמת על טרקטור שבאמת לקח אותנו מהשדה ישירות לעזה. שם גם נפצענו מהירי.
כוח צה"ל יורה לעברם לנסות לעצור את הטרקטור שדוהר עכשיו לעזה.
באמצע הנסיעה בטרקטור היה ירי, שכתוצאה ממנו אמא שלי, האהובה שלי, נרצחה, ואני נפצעתי בגב, ואביבי הקטנה נפצעה ברגל.
The truth of it is, of course, I mean, and you'll know this, George, that many of the fatalities were actually at the hands of the Israeli occupation forces. There is a interesting protocol called the Hannibal Directive. It's an official protocol that has been adopted by the Israeli military for some years, and it's basically to ensure that hostages are never taken, even if that means killing your own people. And it seems to me that the Hannibal Directive was invoked on this occasion, because when some of the resistance fighters were holed up in some of the buildings on that kibbutz, with some of the Israelis there, they were fired at by tanks, and the destruction was obviously by the tank shells. And these were then shown as if it was the resistance fighters that were responsible for these terrible scenes. But of course, that wasn't the case. So similarly, with the vehicles on the roads, as the resistance fighters were taking some of the people that they captured back to Gaza, they were taken out by Apache helicopters in airstrikes.
אני מסתכל זה לפרוץ את החמ"ל, אנחנו מבצעים ירי תפלח באזור המוצב ולנסות לעשות. כן. יאללה. אני יוצא החוץ. קיבלתי קוצר אחד, לזיקים קם דיווח בין 0 ל-1. עשרות אנשים שמנסים להיכנס מול נחלות. מנסים חזרה לרצועה על ציר. בסדר, חצו הרבה מזרחה, ביצעתי עליהם טיל אחד. תקבל אותך. מצוין, קבל. אתה אוחז בהם? כן, עוד חלוט. אלפא. עולה יסוד אופנה אחת שרצת אותך. תל נופש, את הנשלח משם על תורות, אני פצוין. 4 אילוץ. כבר קוצר, סיים בטן, לוקח תסתורו לאומרו, דוד. נפתח, עוד אחד. רגע, תחפת אותך. תגיד אם אתה רוצה שהוא יעלה לחבור לשפטאי בנחלות. תגיד לי שאני יכול לעוף? שפטאי, אני מוציא פרוג אחרון. אמור שלי? עוד רגע פוגע. יש פה אירוע עם הרבה מחבלים, יש כתמם באזור, תביא אותו לסופה. על אנשים שרצים מערבה לכיוון עזה. 2 רשאי, קוצר, קיבלתי ומיד ידע. תודה. תגיד לי סיימנו. עוד רגע, יש פה הרבה. ניסים 47, המשך עוד יותר. עוד רגע? עוד אחד. אנחנו קו 3. לא אכפת.
Based on Israeli sources, that people on October 7th who were said to have been killed by Hamas or other Palestinian militants were in fact killed by friendly fire, by Israeli forces firing indiscriminately at some of the areas that were targeted on October 7th. And for that, you were called conspiracy theorists, including by Haaretz. But now an official Israeli police investigation in Israel has confirmed exactly what you reported, which is that an Israeli helicopter did hit Israeli citizens on October 7th.
Now, an Israeli newspaper is reporting that an Israeli army helicopter may have fired on partygoers at the dance festival that was attacked by Hamas fighters on October the 7th. More than 360 people were killed at the festival in southern Israel. Haaretz is quoting an unnamed police source citing an investigation. Well, according to the paper, a combat helicopter arriving at the scene fired on Hamas fighters and apparently also hit some festival participants. So pretty extraordinary revelations, Hamda. Talk to us about this investigation that's being reported.
An Israeli attack helicopter that was dispatched to shoot on Hamas fighters at the scene may have apparently killed some Israelis fleeing the area as well.
Yeah. In my piece at the Gray Zone, I pointed to testimony by helicopter pilots, and I'll show you some of the footage that I linked to. This was published the day after October 7th by the Israeli military. And you can see them targeting, that was like a tuk-tuk, a rickshaw going back into Gaza. They're targeting cars that are going from the area that the Nova Electronic Music Festival took place, and kibbutz Be'eri and kibbutz Re'im, which also have military bases in them. They're shooting people on foot. And I pointed to testimony in my report at the Gray Zone of Israeli helicopter pilots speaking anonymously to Hebrew language media, describing how they had no intelligence of what was taking place on the ground. They had no idea who was Israeli, who was Palestinian. They were just basically told to empty the tank of their cannons and their Hellfire missiles and to destroy as many vehicles and people on the ground as possible. We have no idea if that, look at this target right here. We have no idea if they were Israeli or Palestinian. And who are these people? They don't know in the helicopters. I quoted a helicopter pilot telling Israeli media that he actually fired on a home in kibbutz Be'eri that had captives inside. He said he actually didn't know if he hit the home or not. He was trying to warn the captives inside. Well, there they just blew up a car and fired and killed everyone inside. I mean, this is horrible footage. And now we know, based on an Israeli police investigation, that this helicopter killed Israeli citizens, Israeli non-combatants. We know that. So here's an Israeli Air Force colonel who's acknowledging that Israel carried out a Mass Hannibal operation on October 7th.
אנחנו לא יודעים אם נפגעו חטופים בשלב שהתחיל ירי של מסקרים וכתממים על הגדר, כשראו את המסות שנכנסות ויוצאות.
נוהל חניבל, אבל זה בכוונה. זאת אומרת, אם הופעל, אז הוא הופעל בכוונה, אם נפגעו חטופים במקרה, זה משהו אחר.
נוהל חניבל כנראה הופעל באיזשהו שלב, כי ברגע שהבינו שיש חטיפה, אז הם מיד אומרים, חבר'ה, זה חניבל. אבל בחניבל שאנחנו התאמנו עליו כל ה-20 שנה האחרונות, זה רכב שיודעים מאיזה נקודה בגדר הוא נכנס, מאיזה רכב, באיזה צד הוא נוסע, ואולי אפילו על איזה ציר הוא נע. פה זה היה חניבל המוני. זה היה המון פתחים בגדר, ואלפי אנשים על כל סוגי כלי הרכב למיניהם, שהיו גם עם חטופים וגם בלי. זה היה משימה בלתי אפשרית לזהות ולעשות מה שעשו. אני יודע שמי שהיה לו חימוש ביד, כתמ"מים והמסקרים, עשו את כל מה שהם יכלו, בלי שליטה, בלי תאום.
The Hannibal directive, according to Colonel Erez, was probably deployed because once you detect a hostage situation, this is Hannibal. And the Hannibal we've been drilling in the past 20 years was related to a vehicle. You know at what point in the fence it comes in, on what side of the road it would move, and even on which road. So they prepared for this scenario. What we saw here was a mass Hannibal. There were many openings in the fence, thousands of people on many different vehicles with hostages and without. So there you have it from an Israeli Air Force colonel, mass Hannibal, the mass targeting of Israeli non-combatants to prevent the scenario in which they'll become captives. So much for the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. Now it's an anti-Semitic conspiracy fact, haaretz.
משם הגיעו כנראה גם השמועות שהצבא הפציץ כל מיני בתים בתוך היישובים, גם נוהל קניבל, כל מיני תיאוריות קונספירציה שרצו בימים הראשונים.
לא הפציצו בתים ללא אישור. אני דרך אגב ראיתי כמות של מל"טים מעל כל יישוב בתמונת מחשב שאנחנו יכולים לראות מכל מקום בכל מפקדה בצה"ל. יש בעיה מאוד רצינית גם להפעיל כתמ"מים בשטח שהוא שטחנו, כשאנחנו לא יודעים מי האויב ומי כיתת הכוננות ומי חיילים שלנו שכבר בשעה 10 היו שם חיילים כבר, ולזהות אותם מהאוויר, לא עם הפליר של המסקר ולא עם המערכת פליר לצורך העניין של הכתמ"מים, זה משימה בלתי אפשרית לחלוטין. אם אין לך מישהו שאתה יכול לדבר איתו ולהגיד, והוא אומר, אני נמצא ליד בית מספר זה וזה או בבית זה וזה, וכל מי שבצד השני אויב, קשה מאוד לפגוע ולשגר. גם פקודת חניבל שמדברים עליה, היא פקודה של לעצור חטיפה של רכב בודד, נכתבה על בסיס חטיפות שנעשו בלבנון כבר לפני 30 שנה. גם בה אין הגדרה חד ערכית, האם למסקר או לכתמ"ם שמזהה את הרכב, האם הוא יפתח באש על הרכב עצמו כדי לעצור את החטיפה הזאת בכל מחיר, כמובן גם במחיר של פגיעה בחטוף. אין פקודה שאומרת את זה, חד משמעית.
וזה קרה פעם?
אנחנו לא יודעים, נפגעו חטופים בשלב שהתחיל ירי של מסקרים וכתמ"מים על הגדר, כשראו את המסות שנכנסות ויוצאות.
נוהל חניבל, אבל זה בכוונה. זאת אומרת, אם הופעל, אז הוא הופעל בכוונה, אם נפגעו חטופים במקרה, זה משהו אחר.
נוהל חניבל כנראה הופעל באיזשהו שלב, כי ברגע שהבינו שיש חטיפה, אז הם מיד אומרים, חבר'ה, זה חניבל. פה זה היה חניבל המוני. זה היה המון פתחים בגדר, ואלפי אנשים על כל סוגי כלי הרכב למיניהם, שהיו גם עם חטופים וגם בלי. זה היה משימה בלתי אפשרית לזהות ולעשות מה שעשו. אני יודע שמי שהיה לו חימוש ביד, כתמ"מים והמסקרים, עשו את כל מה שהם יכלו, בלי שליטה, בלי תאום עם גורמי קרקע, כי לא היו בשלב הראשון.
Yeah, and you combine that with the Israeli police investigation. They didn't tell us how many Israelis were hit by Israeli helicopters, but if a helicopter is firing indiscriminately, that's pretty lethal.
There are many testimonies still coming out about the Israel, like providing cold, hard details by eyewitnesses of the Israeli military killing Israelis. One of them is from Yasmin Port, who's just been talking ever since she was taken captive in kibbutz Be'eri. She's one of the few survivors. She survived because a 50-year-old Hamas militant who is the commander of his platoon decided to surrender. Along with her, he used her as a human shield to surrender to the Israeli military, and she saw them then kill everyone behind her, including all the Israeli captives.
על הדשא של בגינה של האנשים מהקיבוץ, שיש 5 בני ערובה ששוכבים או 6 על האדמה בחוץ, ממש כצאן לטבח מול הירי של הימ"מ שלנו והמחבלים...
הטרוריסטים ירו בהם?
לא. הם נהרגו מהחילופי ירי, תבין שהיה חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים.
זאת אומרת, יכול להיות שזה כוחותינו ירו בהם? כשניסו לפסל את החוטפים, את החמאס?
כן, חיסלו את כולם, כולל הבני ערובה. כי היה שם חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים.
איך כולם נהרגו?
מהחילופי אש.
מהחילופי אש, כלומר, יכול להיות שגם זה מאש כוחותינו?
חד משמעית.
כן?
וככה אני מאמינה.
אוי, זה נשמע כל כך רע.
כן, וכולם מתו.
And she said that two tank shells were fired into the home that she'd been in, and there was a child crying, and that child then went silent. And that child is now being, we'll have more on this later, but that child is now being used as part of Israel's atrocity exhibition to point to Hamas savagery. He was killed by a tank, 100%.
בכל מקרה, אני אקצר לכם. 3 שעות נוספות אני נמצאת בלחימה מאוד מאוד מסיבית, אני פשוט בצד עכשיו של הטובים כביכול. אבל כל האחרים נמצאים תחת חילופי אש מאוד מאוד כבדים, עם מחבלים שהבנתי שהם לא משתפים פעולה, ואומרים שאם לא תיתנו לנו לצאת בחיים, אז כולם מתים. ובאיזשהו שלב מגיע טנק מול הבית, שאני חושבת שהשעה 7:30 בערב, כי אתם צריכים להבין, זה היה שעון קיץ עדיין, ומתחיל כבר להחשיך, ואני זוכרת שתהיתי לעצמי למה יורים פגזים של טנק בתוך הבית, וגם שאלתי את אחד החבר'ה שהייתי, למה יורים, אז הסבירו לי שזה בשביל לשבור את הקירות, כדי לעזור לתאר את הבית. אני יודעת, ועכשיו אני אעבור קצת לשיחה שלי עם הדס, אני יודעת שהדס דגן, שסיפרתי לכם שהיא שכבה, הם שכבו 4 חבר'ה בחוץ צמודים אחד ליד השני, ועוד 2 שישבו מתחת לטרסה.
הדס שוב נזכיר בעלת הבית.
כן, בעלת הבית, הדס דגן. היו 2 בומים גדולים מבחינתה, שאני יודעת שזה 2 פגזים שנורו מהטנק, היא אפילו לא ידעה, כי עוד פעם הם לא רואים כלום, הם מסתכלים לאדמה. היא אומרת, היא סיפרה לי במילים האלה, היא אומרת לי, יסמין, כשהיה את 2 בומים הגדולים, אני הרגשתי שאפתי לשמיים, היא הייתה לה כמו תחושה שהיא מתה וחזרה לחיים, אבל היא בגדול הרגישה שהיא עפה לשמיים ונחתה, למרות שלא נראה לי שזה היה המצב. והיא אמרה לי, ולקח לי 2-3 דקות לפתוח את העיניים, לא הרגשתי את הגוף שלי, הייתי משותקת לחלוטין, וכשפתחתי את העיניים, ראיתי שהעדי שלי מת, שהעורק הראשי שלו נפתח והוא כולו מדמם. היא מספרת לי את זה ממש, היא שמה לו את האגודל שלה על העורק הראשי, אבל הוא כבר היה מת. ואז היא אמרה לי, גם טל שלך כבר הפסיק לזוז בשלב הזה, כי הם שכבו משני צדדיה. היום אני מאמינה שהם הבאו לה באופן טבעי מגן אנושי. הם 2 בחורים גדולים ואישה קטנה, והם שכבו מצידיה, והם פשוט...
יסמין, 2 דברים אולי שרגע, דורשים הבהרה רגע. באיזה שלב ואיך כל בני הערובה שמוחזקים עדיין בבית, איך הם נהרגים, ואיך הדס יוצאת משם בחיים?
היחידה, צריך להגיד, מכל האירוע הזה, את והדס, רק את והדס יצאתם בחיים.
תבינו שמכל האירוע שהוא בערך מסתיים, אני יצאתי משם ב8:30 בערב, אני יוצאת ב5:30, אני במשטרה, ואני נשארת עד 8:30 בערב, 6 לחימה מטורפת, זה שעות של לחימה בין שני הצדדים. כולם שמה, תבינו, שאם מישהו שוכב עם 4 אנשים, שוכבים אחד ליד השני, על דשא כזה בגינה, אז הם כל הזמן שמה, חשופים למאות אלפים של כדורים ורסיסים שעפים באוויר. אי אפשר לא להיפגע מדבר כזה. להגיד לך בסוף, מי נהרג מאיזה כדור של מי, אי אפשר לדעת, אבל זה מהחילופי ירי. לרמת הבנתי, כי הדס יצא משם בחיים והיא מדברת, לא היה שם וידוי הריגה או משהו כזה, לפחות לא החבר'ה שלה, כי היא מספרת לי שאחרי שהיא התרוממה משני הפיצוצים הגדולים, הרימה את הראש או משהו כזה, היא הרגישה שבעלה מדמם עליה, היא הייתה מלאה בדם שלו, אני פגשתי אותה גם אחרי זה, והיא אמרה לי שגם טל שלי ששכב מימינה כבר הפסיק לזוז בשלב הזה, ואז אני זוכרת שהיא מספרת לי את הדבר הבא, היא אומרת לי, הילדה לא הפסיקה לצרוח כל השעות האלה, היא לא הפסיקה לצרוח, אז אמרתי, אני זוכרת שגם כשאני הייתי בשעה הראשונה, היא לא הפסיקה לצרוח, ואז היא אמרה לי, ויסמין שהיו את 2 פגזים האלה, היא כבר הפסיקה לצרוח, אז הייתה דממה. אז מה אתה יכול להבין מזה? שאחרי שהיה את האירוע המאוד מסיבי שם של הירי, שהסתיים עם 2 פגזים, שם בערך כולם הלכו. זה לפחות אני יודעת ככה מהשיחה שלי עם הדס, שמתארת, והיא משום מה, כנראה בגלל שהיא אישה קטנה, וכל הרסיסים עפו על בעלה ועל הבן זוג שלי. היא איכשהו, תשמע, היא לא נראתה נורמלי כשהיא יצאה, כן, היא הייתה נראית, אני הכרתי אותה בבוקר, ואם היית רואה איך היא נראתה בערב, זה לא אותו בן אדם. אבל איכשהו היא שרדה את זה, שום רסיס לא פגע בה, היא הייתה גם מלאה ברסיסים, אבל שום רסיס לא פגע במקום ש...
ואז מה, כל המחבלים נהרגו שם פשוט?
כולם נהרגו, כל הבני ערובה וכל המחבלים. בית של מלא גופות. תבין שעד...
והדס איכשהו
מכל ההרג הזה, כאילו אלוהים רצה שהיא תהיה איתנו, הציל אותה. היא יוצאת מכל התופת הזאת. כשאני ראיתי אותה, היא הייתה... תבין, כשפגשתי אותה בבוקר, היא הייתה לבושה יפה, שיער מסורק. אתה יודע, בן אדם נורמלי. כשהיא יצאה משם, כל השיער שלה עמד.
ואז...
מלא אבק עם קלקרים בתוכו.
אז את מבינה בעצם למה לגבי ליאל לא הייתה קביעה שהיא נהרגה, אלא רק אתמול?
הבנתי, לא מצאו עד היום שרידים שלה. תראה, אני חושבת שחלק מהחומרי נפץ שם, נזריקו רימונים, ולא מבינה כל כך בתחמושת. נזריקו שם דברים שהם מעבר לכדורים של רובה. אני יודעת שהם מתלקחים, ואני רואה גם היום הצילומים שהבית נשרף בחלקו. נגיד, הבית של הדיוויד בהדס לא קיים יותר, לא יודעת איך זה קרה. אז אי אפשר לתאר בכלל איך הבתים האלה נראים. טוב, רואים את זה קצת... אני מעריכה, אם תשאלו אותי, לפי מה שאני מבינה שקרה בבתים אחרים, היא כנראה נשרפה כליל. לברוח משם היא לא ברחה, לא חטפו אותה. אני אומרת לך, לא יצאו משם. זה כבר לא השלב שמישהו יצא משם. לא. מדברים כבר על 8:30 בערב, חושך מוקלט. הבית שרוף, מלא כבר בשלב הזה כבר היה הרבה צבא, היה שם ימם ומטכ"ל, ושכיתרו את הבית. אז זה אומר שליאל לא יכלה לצאת משם. והדס זוכרת, שהייתה כל 4 שעות הלחימה, היא זוכרת אותה לא מפסיקה לצרוח, את הילדה. ופתאום היא מפסיקה.
אוקיי. יסמין פורת. יסמין, תודה רבה על
תודה לכם.
שיתפת אותנו בסיפור הבאמת מטורף הזה.
כן, תודה לכם.
תודה.
ושנדע רק ימים יותר טובים.
רק ימים טובים.
תודה, ביי.
תודה יסמין, תודה רבה.
אחרי צהריים, פתאום ג'יפים מתייצבים לנו על הכביש, והבנו שהצבא סוף סוף הגיע. לא עוברות 5 או 10 דקות מהרגע שהם מגיעים, והתחיל מטח יריות, טירוף, כולנו השתטחנו על הרצפה.
בשלב הזה לי ברור שהתפקיד שלנו הוא שאנחנו חומה אנושית בין הכוחות שלנו שמגיעים ובינם. עדי ואני מתכווצים ונכנסים למצב של כפיות, ושאני מאחוריו מחבקת אותו.
כולנו התחלנו לרוץ, כולל המחבלים. כולנו הסתתרנו. נשכבים על הרצפה, ביריות, בום 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 בום, כדורים נכנסים לבית בכל דרך אפשרית. ופתאום מרגמה, לא יודעת, משהו כבד, לא... עשה בום בכל הבית.
אני שומעת את הילדים, הצילו! הצילו, בבקשה, הצילו!
הגענו בבקשה, אני מבקשת.
לא אשכח בחיים את הצעקות של הילדים. איך שהם זועקים לעזרה, ומתחים, שוב מתחים.
כוחות הימ"מ יורים 2 טילי לאו לכיוון הבית.
שוב מתחים, וידי מנסה להרים את הראש, ואני אומרת, מורידה לו. ככה, מורידה לו את הראש, לא מדברים, אי אפשר לדבר. ואז פתאום עדי אומר לי, הדס, זאב כבר לא איתנו. אנחנו שוכבים על הצד, ואני מסתכלת דרך הכתף. אז אני אומרת לו, גם פסי לא איתנו.
הטנק במקום יורה 2 פגזים, אחד לרצפה, השני לגג הבית.
פתאום בום נוראי, ואני לא מצליחה להזיז את הרגליים, ואני רואה והידיים שלי שמוטות, אני לא מצליחה להזיז כבר לא מחבקת את דושי, ואני אומרת לו, דושי, אני חושבת שנפגעתי. ובשלב הזה אני אומרת לו עוד פעם שאני אוהבת אותו, היה לי ברור שיש פה טנק. זה היה ברור לי לגמרי. אל תשאלי אותי איך, אני לא יודעת. ואז היה הבום השני. אני מרגישה שנפגעתי. ואני מרגישה שזורם עליי הרבה דם. ואני מסתכלת, מפנה את הראש כדי לראות מה קרה לי בדיוק. ואז אני רואה חור כזה בעורק הראשי של עדי. ואני לוקחת את האגודל שלי, זאת היד, לוקחת את האגודל שלי ועושה לו חוסם עורקים, כי מה אני עוד יכולה לעשות? עוד רגע זז, וכבר לא זז, אבל אני ככה שוכבת, עד שאני מבינה אני בתוך שלולית של דם, ואין כבר למה לעשות חוסם, ואני פשוט חוזרת לחבק אותו ושוכבת עם הפרצוף, עם הכל בתוך שלולית ענקית של דם. ואני זוכרת שאני שומעת עוד ירייה אחת מתוך הבית, ואני לא שומעת כלום כבר. ומחכה לכדור שלי.
אני צופה עכשיו על בארי, על החלק הצפוני. אני רואה מוקד עשן בחלק הצפוני מערבי מול הבית עלמין. שם זה הקרקלים הצופים? חיובי, שם...
התיעוד הזה חושף בפנינו את היקף הלחימה ומספר המחבלים הבלתי נתפס שהשתלטו על הקיבוץ. הוא תיעד את הטנק שסייע לכוחות בבית של פסי וירה פגזים לעבר הבית.
והם הביאו פתאום טנק, ואני אומרת לאחד החיילים, תגיד, אבל אם אתם יורים פגזים זה לא יפגע בבני הערובה? אז הוא אומר לי, לא, אנחנו רק עושים את זה בצדדים, להוריד קירות.
הוא מעצים את סימני השאלה בהתנהלות צה"ל והימ"מ מול בית עם 15 בני ערובה.
בא לראות טנק בתוך בארי. עושה על הכביש. הופה, היה שם איזה ירי. וואו.
פתאום בום נוראי. ואני לא מצליחה להזיז את הרגליים. היה לי ברור שיש פה טנק. זה היה ברור לי לגמרי. אני נפגעתי ועדי מהרסיס של הפגז של הטנק. כי זה היה ממש באותו רגע.
התיעוד החדש חושף שפגז נורה לכיוון הבית של פסי כבר בשעה 5:30 באור יום, שעה וחצי אחרי שהגיעו הכוחות לאזור. לוחמים ששהו במקום מספרים שזה היה ירי האזהרה הראשון, אחריו הטנק נפגע, והגיע טנק אחר שהשלים את המשימה.
הופה, היה שם איזה ירי. וואו.
בשלב מסוים אנחנו מגיעים לבארי. וכבר בצומת אתה רואה שם שברי מכוניות ואזור קרב.
כדי לתאר לך את הסיטואציה, אתה יושב בקיבוץ בתוך מדינת ישראל, שאני מטייל שם בשבתות עם הילדים באופניים. אתה כל דקה יורד עליך טיל, כל דקה. פתאום אתה רואה טיל ממסוק שיורה לתוך הקיבוץ. זאת אומרת, לא הבנתי. מסוק צה"לי יורה לתוך קיבוץ ישראלי, ואז אתה רואה טנק נוסע ברחובות הקיבוץ, מצודד את התותח ויורה לפגז לתוך בית. זה דברים שאתה לא מצליח להבין, ואז פתאום אתה קולט בצד ימין מאות אנשים מהקיבוץ. באיזה שלב מאוד מהיר אמרנו, רגע, מישהו צריך להוציא את החבר'ה האלה מפה, כי זה לא הגיוני.
כי נופלים טילים וכיורים.
אזור מלחמה. עכשיו, בסוף הם יצאו מהגיהנום הזה בתוך הקיבוץ, ומה, יחטפו טיל בכניסה לקיבוץ? כי מה? כי מחכים למי? זה לא היה נראה לנו הגיוני בתור הורים לילדים.
We have to talk about this. We have to explain exactly what happened on October 7th, because Israel is determined to use it as the justification for its genocide in Gaza. So in my piece, I use Hebrew language media testimonies of eyewitnesses to Israel's response on October 7th, as well as visual evidence of the supposed Hamas crimes, the most grisly crimes that are being presented by Israel on the international stage, to show that Israel may have killed large numbers of its own civilians, including non-combatants, in an effort to dislodge Hamas gunmen. And that's not to say that Hamas militants did not intentionally kill large numbers of Israelis, but they had small arms. They entered on foot and on motorcycles with Kalashnikovs. But what we saw in, for example, kibbutz Be'eri, is every home was destroyed. They were destroyed with tank shells. And now we have admissions in Haaretz, only in Hebrew, that those houses were shelled in a deliberate military order, knowing that Israeli civilians were inside. And so then you see all these charred bodies, burned bodies in cars. You have Apache helicopter pilots saying, we were operating without any intelligence. We didn't know who was on the ground, but we had to fire everything we had. So you see all these photographs of cars that have completely been bombed out and the bodies inside are completely charred. Are we to believe that Hamas gunmen were able to meticulously burn every car and burn every home and somehow blow up these homes and reduce them to rubble and make them look like the damage we see in Gaza?
We had the number at 1,400 casualties, and now we've revised that down to 1,200 because we understood that we had overestimated. We made a mistake. There were actually bodies that were so badly burnt, we thought they were ours. In the end, apparently, they were Hamas terrorists. When we make a mistake, we admit it.
So there you go. That's the admission right there. That's exactly what you predicted, and now he's admitting it.
So what we saw, Israel bombed its own base, its own military base at the Erez crossing. That's the biggest nerve center of the siege on Gaza. It was overwhelmed by Hamas militants, and they bombed it with helicopters, with Hellfire missiles. And now the roof is off. The base is like mostly destroyed, and they had all their civil administrators inside. So now they're using these photos of charred bodies to say that Hamas burns people, that they rape people, and not to say that there were not atrocities committed by Hamas on October 7th. But it's amazing how the Israeli response on October 7th was so badly botched. There was so much friendly fire, and now they're using that to make way for more atrocities, senseless atrocities in Gaza, including the killing of Israeli captives, so the killing of more Israeli citizens.
I want to play a clip of one of the women in this meeting. She herself was a hostage with her children. They were freed, but her husband is still inside. She says that no one was doing anything for them, she says, and that Israeli shelling actually wounded them. Take a listen.
You will return them all. They will not wait 50 days. They will not wait another year, because you claim that they are strong enough. You have no information. You have no information. The fact that we were shelled, the fact that no one knew anything about where we were.
You just heard from a freed Israeli hostage just tearing into Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his handling of the war in Gaza, over his handling of the hostages that remain captive in the Gaza Strip. And really, it's no secret that the family members of these hostages had been tearing into Benjamin Netanyahu and the current coalition government over its handling of a number of issues involving this war. There had been reports indicating that they were furious with Netanyahu and certainly concerned about the well-being of the hostages, given the aerial bombardment that has been leading to incredibly high civilian death tolls on the Palestinian side. But now we really have a better understanding of that rage and the rage that the freed hostages and their family members have about the military operations that Bibi is overseeing in Gaza. The same freed hostage that we heard from earlier in the story is who we're gonna read some quotes from now, because later in the audio, she also told Netanyahu, quote, "The feeling we had there was that no one was doing anything for us. The fact is that I was in a hiding place that was shelled, and we had to be smuggled out and we were wounded. That's besides the helicopter that shot at us on the way to Gaza." So I've been dying to know what the hostages had been experiencing in regard to the aerial bombardment that's been taking place in Gaza. Because remember, when Israel blocks the entry of humanitarian aid, that means food, water, fuel. When Israel engages in these aerial bombardments, in this bombing, it's not just simply going to impact the Palestinian lives that have been lost, which is, by the way, deplorable and terrible enough. But if they genuinely cared about the hostages, they would maybe reconsider whether these military operations make sense because the hostages are dealing with, these actions as well. And here we have a hostage making abundantly clear that they were terrorized by the shelling. They were terrorized by the bombing. And some of them did, in fact, get injured and wounded as a result. Now, she also says that throughout the time we were there, we felt abandoned twice. Once on Saturday, October 7th, when you did not protect us, and a second time every day that passes that we are not released. We didn't believe we would be there for so long. So they felt that the Netanyahu government was not really interested in freeing them and saving them. There's concern that the remaining hostages are being held in those tunnels, and drowning out the tunnels means drowning out potentially the hostages as well. Now, with that said, referring to reports that the Israeli military is considering flooding Hamas tunnels in Gaza, she says this, and you're talking about washing the tunnels with seawater. You are shelling the route of tunnels in the exact area where they are, meaning where the remaining hostages are. The girls ask me, where is their father? And I have to tell them that the bad guys don't want to yet release them. And it's unclear if she's referring to Netanyahu when she refers to the bad guys, or if she's referring to Hamas, or maybe both. But I say that because she's just completely dressing him down, Netanyahu, and she's just totally tearing into him. And so I feel like she meant that statement for Netanyahu, but I want to be clear that it's unclear who she was referring to there. And she also adds, quote, "You put politics above the return of the kidnapped." Now, this freed Israeli hostage wasn't the only one at the meeting who was absolutely incensed by Netanyahu and the IDF. A former captive from kibbutz near Oz, who was recently released as part of the deal, also told Netanyahu the following: "I experienced captivity and I understand its hardships. Every day in captivity was extremely challenging. We were in tunnels, terrified that it would not be Hamas, but Israel that would kill us. And then they would say, Hamas killed you." That is an incredible statement. It really is.
ביבי נתניהו שלום. אנחנו נמצאים בשבי החמאס 23 ימים. אתמול הייתה מסיבת עיתונאים עם משפחות החטופים. אנחנו יודעים שהייתה אמורה להיות הפסקת אש, היית אמור לשחרר את כולנו, התחייבת לשחרר את כולנו, ובמקום זה אנחנו נושאים במחדל הפוליטי, ביטחוני, צבאי, מדיני שלך, בגלל הפשלה הזאת שעשית ב7 לאוקטובר, בגלל שלא היה צבא שם, אף אחד לא הגיע, אף אחד לא שמר עלינו, ואנחנו אזרחים תמימים, אזרחים שמשלמים מיסים למדינת ישראל, נמצאים בשבי, בתנאים לא תנאים. אתה הורג אותנו, אתה תהרוג, אתה רוצה להרוג את כולנו, אתה רוצה עם צה"ל להרוג את כולנו, לא מספיק טבחת בכולם, לא מספיק אזרחים ישראלים נהרגו, שחרר אותנו עכשיו, שחרר את האזרחים שלהם, שחרר את האסירים שלהם, שחרר אותנו, שחרר את כולנו, תן לנו לחזור למשפחות שלנו עכשיו!
ביבי, הפצצת את המשפחה שלי, הרגת לי את האישה ואת הילדים שלי, כל מה שהיה לי בחיים. מה שאתה יכול לעשות זה להחזיר אותי ואותם הביתה, שיקבעו בישראל. אני מתחנן אליך, תחזיר אותי את אשתי ואת הילדים שלי הביתה. בבקשה, אני מתחנן אליך.
אני חיים פרי, בן 79, מקיבוץ ניר עוז. אני נמצא פה עם קבוצה של אנשים מאוד מבוגרים, כולם עם בעיות, מחלות רקע, שסובלים פה מאוד בתנאים מאוד קשים. אנחנו דור שבנה את המדינה, אנחנו השתתפנו בבניית הצבא, ואני לא מבין למה אנחנו פה. אתה חייב לשחרר אותנו בכל תנאי. אנחנו לא רוצים להיות קורבן להפצצות חיל האוויר. שחרר אותנו בלי שום תנאי. אל תשליכנו לעת זקנה.
All right, as we just reported a few moments ago, just got word from the IDF that the Israeli military says it has mistakenly killed 3 Israeli hostages during its ground operation in the Gaza Strip. They said that during combat, the IDF mistakenly identified those hostages as a threat, and as a result, the troops fired toward them, and they were killed. Victoria Coates is joining us now. She joins us by phone. The IDF, Victoria, said they, during their searches and checks in the area in which the incident occurred, a suspicion rose over the identities of the deceased. Their bodies were transferred to Israeli territory for examination, after which it was confirmed that they were indeed 3 Israeli hostages.
A spokesman for the Israel Defense Force is saying the 3 men, Yotam Chaim, Samer Talalka, and Alon Shimriz, either managed to escape or had been abandoned by Hamas, and they likely believed they were on their way to freedom. And then, according to the IDF, they were confronted by Israeli forces, a moment that for them, maybe they thought, oh my gosh, finally. But the Israeli Defense Forces mistakenly viewed them as a threat, and they shot and killed them.
A little bit more information to bring you now, coming from an IDF official concerning those 3 hostages who were killed by Israeli forces. We understand that they were fired upon against Israel's rules of engagement, that according to the IDF official. Further, that they were killed mistakenly in Gaza by Israel's military, and while they were holding up white cloth on a stick, I suppose the universal sign for surrendering in peace.
The IDF telling me they can't guarantee this won't happen again.
You can't rule out that more hostages inside Gaza are going to die at the hands of Israeli soldiers.
No, hopefully not die at the hands of our soldiers, but definitely that there will be instances like this in the future, so we cannot rule that out.
So far, at least 20 Israeli hostages have died, and more than 100 are thought to remain in Gaza.
So, if you haven't already heard, Israeli forces shot and killed 3 Israeli hostages in Gaza. And I think this really just demonstrates that they are indiscriminately killing so many civilians. And I think when they're Palestinian, people are so quick to say that they were terrorists and that the IDF would never do that, even when, you know, Palestinians come out and tell you their family member was shot and killed. Their innocent family member was shot and killed. When Doctors Without Borders tells you that their colleagues or their patients were shot and killed. In the West Bank, a teenager was shot and killed. And people are so quick to say, oh, like, they weren't innocent, even though they are. And, you know, Doctors Without Borders is saying they were unarmed. They were a patient in a hospital and they were murdered.
This is a hospital. The health system here is overwhelmed. This hospital simply cannot take more children with the wounds of war. There are children everywhere. These children are sleeping. There was a bomb literally 50 meters from here. I cannot overstate how the capacity has been reduced of hospitals in the last 7 weeks. We cannot see more children with the wounds of war, with the burns, with the shrapnel littering their body, with the broken bones. Inaction by those with influence is allowing the killing of children. This is a war on children.
This is really just evidence. The fact that they couldn't even have a conversation with the hostages where they could have said we're hostages before they shot and killed them. And they didn't know they were hostages until after their bodies were identified. And I think there needs to be a tipping point where people who once supported the IDF and thought that they were doing what was the best interest for the hostages and Israelis and Palestinians, where they recognize that that really is not the case. The fact that they are not only just indiscriminately killing Palestinians, but they're making videos going into their homes, mocking them, riding their bicycles. Like, they're destroying their graves. They're just, the list goes on and on. They're going to their mosque. Like, they're doing so many things just to purely disrespect Palestinians. That has nothing to do with their mission with Hamas or getting the hostages back. And now they have killed 3 hostages. And I really hope that this is the tipping point where some people recognize that the IDF is not what you thought they were. They're not. Like, if you think of those 3 Israeli hostages that were killed, imagine how many Palestinians who have been in the same situation where they were shot and killed for no reason. And I really hope that after this, people start to recognize that. Like, I just don't know how anyone can support the absolute horrors that the IDF are committing.
ماخذين عنها زلمه كبير ساعتين بعدين سالنا اجانا له بقول اخذوه عنده بالغرفه اللي وما حس التلفون كلهم غرفه
يعني اعدام؟
عدموهم قدام عينين هي وجوزها اولادها 8 وبنت عمها يمكن هذه هي بنت عمها احنا ما بنعرف بنت عمها.
They're recording it, they're like filming it, like it's all so horrendous and it's so devastating, and I don't know how much longer this will go on where people can continue to just support the murder of Palestinians and now the murder of Israelis. Even though after October 7th happened, there's been so many reports and video footage that the IDF also killed Israelis. They shot at people at the festival. They shot at people in their homes. Like, they already killed so many Israelis on October 7th. And I don't, even after Israelis come out and say that, some people still don't believe it. I don't know why, but this is just more evidence, and I hope people start to actually open their eyes and recognize what is going on.
Anyone who can see right now what their military is doing and how little regard they have for Israeli life, they need to demand an independent investigation. And Netanyahu is saying, we're going to do that after the war. Don't talk about that, because he knows how sensitive it is. So it's so important to focus on that. And our own media hasn't touched this. It's a major story. It's one of the biggest stories of the war. Our own media hasn't touched it. Electronic Intifada did it. Mondo Weiss has touched it. We are on it. Our media won't touch it. So they need to engage with the fact that Israel's killed and is killing its own citizens senselessly.
And Max, just so that nobody twists what you're saying, because people will try to. I don't hear anything in what you've written. You acknowledge that obviously some Israeli civilians were killed by the militants, whether they were Hamas.
Well, I said, yeah, and I said that. I said that in the piece, and I just said that now. The point is, what were the weapons that we saw? I mean, Hamas recorded it. So first of all, they recorded themselves in Israeli military bases. There are close to 900 confirmed Israeli deaths, which is 500 less than the figure that we have been told since the beginning of 1400. If, Biden and his team want to challenge the Palestinian death toll, then two can play that game. The confirmed deaths are now at 900. Almost 50% of those deaths are uniformed Israeli soldiers who were actively engaged in the siege of Gaza and were combatants engaged in an act of war on October 7th.
And people can verify that themselves if they want to by going to Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper that has a tool. And that's where those figures are coming from.
Okay, so yes, exactly. So go see for yourself. So that's 50% of those deaths around. And then there are many armed Israeli who people who were carrying guns in their homes. It's a very armed society. But the Hamas militants filmed much of that with GoPro cameras and with cell phones and put it online. And also GoPro cameras were recovered from dead Hamas militants and have been put online at like the Telegram account of South Responders, which is an Israeli rescue organization. And then they've been fed to the media as part of Israel's propaganda. And they do show them actually shooting some people with Kalashnikovs. And it is pretty clear that they were setting up checkpoints and shooting motorists who were passing by, escaping from the Nova Music Festival. But we don't see any evidence that they were able to burn every home in a kibbutz and reduce the homes to rubble, or burn all these bodies in cars. Those are the telltale signs of hellfire missiles and tank shells. And so that's what I'm saying. And that tactic may have caused heavy death tolls. Again, it's all to avoid the scenario of negotiation, in my view.
Yeah, and this QR code that the Israeli ambassador asked people to scan, right, to take people to evidence of that Israel collected supposedly against Hamas. You were in your article, you talk about this, that the file online that goes to was actually some of the some of the pieces of so-called evidence were deleted?
Yeah, Gilad Erdan has actually the UN ambassador who waived that QR code. As soon as he waived it, I went there, and first of all, the photos were questionable themselves. But second of all, they all disappeared, and now he's gone on Twitter and complained that they were all taken down because of complaints, because he's basically putting snuff films on a Google Drive and distributing it across the internet, basically like burned body parts. But as I pointed out, one of those photos that he was promoting as Hamas atrocities showed a pile of burned, comprehensively charred bodies in a dump truck. Okay, we saw video after video, and I linked to it in my article. I definitely am not showing it here, of Israelis defiling the corpses of Hamas activists and gunmen and everybody killed who came in from Gaza. Some of the people who came in were just onlookers. Defiling them in the most disgusting way, stripping them, urinating on them, mutilating their body parts. Israelis who were killed that day were taken away in body bags individually to mortuaries and to forensic pathologists. So it's pretty obvious that the Israeli rescue crews or whoever arrived on the scene dumped dead Hamas militants in a dumpster after they were killed in either a tank strike or a Hellfire missile strike. They missed that. That was essentially defiling their bodies. They would have never done that to Jewish Israelis. So Gilad Erdan was promoting dead Hamas gunmen as evidence of Hamas atrocities, or to essentially say that they burned Israelis and put them in a dumpster to reinforce the point that Hamas is ISIS. That disappeared, and now he's saying it was just a glitch.
Yeah, and this follows, as you talk about a lot, this attempt to roll out this lie about 40 beheaded babies, right? Which was spread around a lot, and then ultimately that was retracted. So there's ample grounds to be skeptical of everything that Israel has said, and your report at thegrayzone.com is trying to look at some of the available evidence that comes from, as far as I understand your story, it comes from Israeli sources.
100%, and you can just look at the visual evidence. And I also relied on documentation of my own in Gaza in 2014, where like a car of a taxi driver named Fadel Alawan, who was killed by a Hellfire missile strike from a drone after he dropped a wounded fighter off at a hospital without knowing it. He didn't, and they just killed him. So I got to look at his car in Gaza City. It looked just like the cars that you see in the Israeli propaganda that they're saying Hamas burned. And I actually remember looking in his car and seeing his sandal melted into the gas pedal. Only a Hellfire missile can do that and have that much precision. So I think there's another piece to be done, and it's about the source of the beheaded baby's claim. We nailed one of the sources, who happened to be an extremist settler who was a reservist who got to kibbutz Be'eri and just fed this lie to Israeli journalists. But there's another source behind so many of these claims, like, for example, that Hamas cut the fetus out of a woman. And it's one rescuer who's part of this rescue crew called Zaka. And basically everyone's just taking these people at their word without doing any examination. I think one day there will be an independent commission, and it will bear out a lot of the points that I'm making, that a lot of people on the Israeli left, the radical left in Israel, are making right now, and which a lot of the families of captives are quietly discussing, but which they're afraid to say in public.
Ja, die wo halt sie wollten, es hat ja immer geheißen, sie wollen sie retten, aber sie haben sie getötet, und das ist die Wahrheit. Die wollten, also ich sage jetzt mal Hamas, die wollten sie schützen, auch wenn sie entführt haben, aber gemordet hat Israel. Die Bundeswehr haben ihn gemordet. Ich habe ein Video gekriegt. Ich darf aber nichts sagen. Ich werde verfolgt, ich werde bedroht, weil ich als Angehörige nichts sagen darf. Und es geht ganz vielen Angehörigen so, wo eben damit betroffen sind, dass irgendwelche Familienmitglieder entführt worden ist. Und es muss jetzt endlich mal die Wahrheit.
And it's, again, it's one of the biggest stories of the war, and the whole U.S. and Western media won't touch it.
In the U.S., I've only seen apart from the gray zone, there were stories earlier on in the electronic intifada and also Mondo Weiss to this effect. But otherwise, this aspect's been totally ignored.
The truth of what happened on October 7th is beginning to emerge, and you are right to identify that it is emerging not from the Western press, but from the Israeli media and from the Israeli public, who are a switched on and internet savvy public. And the latest revelation is the actual footage from the Apache helicopters that were machine gunning people and vehicles at the festival, the music festival, where people were dancing almost within earshot of the anguish behind the wire in the refugee camp, the concentration camp called Gaza. A very significant number of people were killed on October the 7th. Most of them were Israeli military and security forces. Don't take my word for that. Take the word of the Israeli media for that, who've now published the names and rank and serial number of the 2/3 of the casualties who were Israeli military and security forces. And of the remaining 1/3, it is becoming more and more clear, as hostages told us from the beginning, that many of those, maybe most of those, were actually killed in pursuit of this Hannibal doctrine by Israeli armed elements themselves. Now, there were no rapes. That's just a brazen lie. No evidence has been adduced in 4 weeks of propaganda war to in any way justify that slander. There were not 40 beheaded babies. There's only one baby dead on October 7th. One. Who killed that baby is not yet at all clear. These lies have fueled a genocide. And those who keep repeating them, even when they're being debunked by Israeli people themselves, have a lot to answer for.
Hi panel, I'm talking to Miko Peled and Ivan Ois about the war in Israel. Miko Peled is an author, activist, pro-Palestinian activist, and has written, like I said, written books on this subject. His grandfather signed Israel's Declaration of Independence. Miko, can I ask you, based on October the 7th, I mean, you mentioned there was a flare-up, but what do you believe happened? Because you said you didn't believe that people were raped or people. What do you believe really happened then?
The news. Well, we know what happened. We know that fighters out of the Gaza Strip came out, and occupied, I believe, 22 cities and kibbutzim and settlements in the southern part of the country. We know now, as more and more evidence is coming out by Israeli witnesses, that is obvious. It's in the Israeli press. I don't know if you read Hebrew, but it's in the Israeli press, that a great number of the Israeli casualties were actually caused by the Israeli military firing. There was one witness in kibbutz Be'eri who actually saw them shelling houses where there were hostages. We know now, we've heard this more than once in the Israeli papers, that the fighter helicopters, the war helicopters that tried to attack the Palestinian fighters early on, were not able to differentiate between the Palestinian fighters and civilians and killed a great many civilians. And we don't know for sure what happened during the music festival, although we do know that there was tragically people died, and there were definitely casualties as a result of Israelis firing, the Israeli military firing at the time. So we don't know the full extent of the details of what happened as a result.
So you're saying that the idea
we do know, excuse me, but we do know this. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I did not interrupt you. I don't know why you're interrupting me. We do know very well that the objective, the declared objective of this of this attack on October the 7th was to take hostages, to take prisoners, and then have an exchange, a prisoner exchange, in order to release the thousands of Palestinians that Israel has hijacked and kidnapped and has taken, that has in custody, the vast majority of whom are either political prisoners or prisoners because they're Palestinians. And that was the objective. And so when you put together the fact that, number one, this was the declared objective, number two, that these were trained and disciplined Muslim fighters, and number three, that we know for sure many of the victims were as a result of Israeli fire, I think it's very, very clear that all the accusations that were leveled against the Palestinians at this point are at best unclear and at worst vicious lies.
Yeah, I think we need to give you a chance to respond.
Okay, so as I understand it, you're Jewish. So you are denying that babies were found in ovens. You are claiming that the idea is that babies were beheaded. You're claiming that the young people at the music or peace festival were targeted. You're claiming that the woman who was raped and paraded through the streets of Gaza. You claim all of this was nonsense. And what happened predominantly on the 7th of October was caused by the Israeli Defense Forces. Is that really your narrative about October the 7th? That needs to be clear. Is that what you are saying happened on October the 7th? It was predominantly the responsibility, all those evil atrocities were predominantly the responsibility of the IDF. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's not just me saying it. Much of this is coming out of the Israeli press. And what I am saying, you want to hear what I'm saying? What I am saying is that the stories about beheading and rape have been completely refuted. Those
what about babies in ovens?
That was nonsense.
Babies in ovens. How do you feel about that?
That was all refuted. These were refuted everywhere. Look at the Israeli press. Look at everyone else that looked into this. These claims were early on refuted, and the fact that Zionists and others are repeating these vicious lies against the Palestinians is only to discredit the Palestinians. But we know for sure that none of that happened. It wouldn't make sense for it to happen anyway, if you think about it logically, but it didn't happen. It's been refuted.
What
we do know, I'm saying that what we do know, and it's again not me saying, I'm looking at the facts, I'm looking at the reality, I'm reading the different sources that are out there providing information. And according to these sources, we know very well that a great deal of the casualties, the Israeli casualties, were caused by Israeli fire.
You mentioned that. I think you mentioned that, but you middle of saying something. What were you saying?
I'm sorry. I'm saying we don't know if and how many, and if any at all, were killed by Palestinians. We don't know that because that has not yet been investigated.
There's literally no evidence that sexual assault and rape took place. They have yet to produce any evidence. It's just something that they're just putting forward now. The Israeli Foreign Ministry has appropriated the Me Too movement's "believe all women" phrase to try to push this idea and impose the idea in the minds of Westerners that mass rape was committed.
But look at this headline quickly, Max, just on the issue of rape. Amid war and urgent need to ID bodies, evidence of Hamas's October 7th rapes slips away. And so this is the Times of Israel reporting that they collected no physical evidence of rape from the bodies.
The world has to decide who to believe. Do we believe the Hamas spokesperson who said that rape is forbidden, therefore it couldn't have possibly happened on October 7th? Or do we believe the women whose bodies tell us how they spent the last minutes of their lives? Who are we going to believe?
Well, that was Sheryl Sandberg. She joined female Israeli leaders addressing the United Nations today, sharing details about horrific sexual violence committed by Hamas terrorists, including the rape and mutilation of women taken hostage.
All of a sudden, nearly 2 months after October 7th, these allegations of mass rape by Hamas militants are resurfacing. And it's pretty clear what's going on here. Israel is suffering a PR crisis because of what it's doing in Gaza, this mass murder campaign. And so we're seeing all the usual suspects, Hillary Clinton and others, coming out to basically try to give credibility to these allegations that Hamas committed mass rape on October 7th.
As a global community, we must respond to weaponized sexual violence wherever it happens with absolute condemnation. There can be no justifications and no excuses. Rape as a weapon of war is a crime against humanity.
And it's important to call that out because, as we're going to talk about, the evidence for that just is not there. And this follows so many other documented frauds committed by Israel and its supporters. And some of the same people involved in those frauds,
Same
including
sources.
Some of the same sources, including this group Zaka, which you profile at the Gray Zone in your new piece, are involved in pushing this as well. So it's important to call it out because this is now the playbook for trying to justify the ongoing atrocities by Israel inside Gaza, the ongoing mass murder campaign by Israel inside Gaza.
Yeah, it's sort of the background noise for genocide. And predictably, they've weaponized liberalism. They've weaponized feminism to justify the mass killing of women and children. Predictably and also disgustingly. And it's just about a giant marketing campaign to create this propaganda shock and awe to distract from the genocide in Gaza and to justify it back to the Israeli public. And so who was on the scene after October 7th? It was the Israeli military. As we've seen, many military commanders have lied. They've lied about, like, one commander was caught lying or had to retract lying about seeing babies hung on a laundry line. And he actually said the IDF spokesman told him to say that. We exposed at the Gray Zone another military reservist for initially saying he saw beheaded babies. But there were also these so-called first responders in the south of Israel who were on the scene, who are responsible for the most obscene atrocity fabrications. And this is where Zaka comes in, this group that Aaron mentioned. And it's really there's one man who is responsible for most of the obscene fabrications, either confirming the fake beheaded baby story or spinning out a story of children being mutilated while their parents were killed, and then the Hamas militants having a pleasant lunch while they lay dead in the next room, which was repeated by Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, during an October 31st Senate hearing, a completely bogus story, which I expose in this report.
In a litany of brutality and inhumanity that, yes, brings to mind the worst of ISIS. Babies slaughtered, bodies desecrated, young people burned alive, women raped, parents executed in front of their children, children in front of their parents. How are we even to understand this?
Biden, of course, claimed he saw photos of the beheaded babies. There were none. But
thank you for the intensity of your support. It matters. It matters that Americans see what's happening. I mean, I've been doing this a long time. I never really thought that I would see and have confirmed pictures of terrorists beheading children. I never thought I'd ever, anyway.
These are emanating from Zaka and one man, Yossi Landau, who is their so-called Southern commander, and who now says that anybody who questions him, he said this in an interview, should be killed.
October 7th, the radio starts to come in from police officials, army officials that I'm connected.
Yossi Landau. Yossi Landau. With Yossi Landau, who is a 30-year veteran of this Zaka search and rescue group.
Believe me, what you saw, we didn't see that in the Holocaust.
And I go into the history of the organization. We can talk about it, but I this is just my take on the whole backdrop to what we're seeing now and what we're going to be confronted with for the rest of the year.
Believe me, what you saw doesn't come close even to the Holocaust. It's worse. It's much worse than the Holocaust. We didn't see that in the Holocaust.
Yeah, and that sort of indignation at the request for evidence, which is at the heart of any allegation. If you're going to make an allegation, you have to provide evidence. You have also the head of that commission this so-called rape commission by Israel, who you mentioned before. Her name is
Kohav
Okay.
El-Kayam Levy.
There's a profile of her in Haaretz where she takes offense at people calling her, like journalists and others from around the world, calling her and asking her for evidence. So this is what she says. She says this: "Am I the one who needs to provide the evidence for the terrorist deeds? What kind of travesty is it that they are imposing the burden of proof on me?" So the head of the supposed commission by Israel to investigate rape, alleged rape on October 7th, is saying it's a travesty that she has to provide proof for her claims. So it's just taken at face value that, yes, these barbaric savages, as Barry Weiss called them, they committed mass rape. And anybody demanding evidence for this allegation is taking part in a travesty.
Yeah. And so here's that head of that commission. I caught her spreading a obvious lie out of many dubious claims during Harvard, a session where it was pretty much her introductory session, hosted by the Maimonides Society, which is a Jewish pro-Israel group at Harvard Medical School.
Another image shows the body of a young woman stripped from the waist down, her underwear were torn, hung on one leg, and she was photographed on the site at the Nova Music Festival.
Okay, that is false. I can't show you the photos that she's referring to because we'll be demonetized and we could get a strike. I don't know what'll happen. We'll definitely be demonetized. But they're on my Twitter timeline right now. Or everywhere I've investigated it. These photos were initially shared by a website called Hamas.massacre, which is being promoted by Israel's foreign ministry. They show exactly what she described: a woman or women face down, stripped from the waist down, with their underwear kind of ripped to the side. And I looked for the source of those photos, and I found them being shared as early as March 2022 with people claiming on Twitter that they were Ukrainian female soldiers. So the photos originated from well before October 7th, 2023. And what they appear to show is actually female Kurdish fighters. The Kurdish army in quote unquote Rojava uses many female fighters, and their bodies were defiled, possibly by, formerly CIA-backed Syrian quote unquote rebels. But the point is, she just found some photo that looked like she could market it as a rape victim because there were no other photos from the Nova Electronic Music Festival showing anything like that. They're clearly wearing military uniforms. And then she just delivers a somewhat vague description of it. So I called her out. My tweet went viral. It got like 20,000 likes. And she felt compelled to respond. So I want to show you her response. She responded directly to me, and it's so revealing of what this whole commission is about. So here's her response to me. She blocked me, so it's a screenshot, which was also very mature to deliver sort of a petulant response and then block me. "Thanks so much for sharing this," she writes to me, "giving such an important exposure of the event at Harvard, one of the hardest moments in my life. Also, thanks for sharing my article," and we'll talk about that, where I advocated for the protection of prisoners' rights, blah, blah, blah. So basically, she just thanks me for sharing a video of her where she's caught in a major lie, a major deception. She doesn't acknowledge it and say, I was confused, but the rest of what I stated was correct. Or she didn't say, you're wrong, and here's why you're wrong. She just thanks me for the promotion, because that's all this commission is about. It's only about creating publicity, spreading propaganda, and giving pro-Israel lobbyists and activists the ammo they need to try to shut down their opponents. Oh, well, what do you think about Hamas rape? What do you think? And they can just table the entire discussion. So she doesn't even care about the truth or facts or inquiry. That's not what this is about. And you can see, she's saying, she advocated for prisoners' rights. I highlighted a 2015 article she wrote for the Israeli Attorney General, which was first mentioned by Mondoweiss. And she's explaining how to use human rights law to break Palestinian prisoner hunger strikes. And so she does it in a liberal way by saying the prisoner's right to life is the most important right, and that's why we have to force feed them. So,
and Max, listen, very important point about, so you called out this commission head and this Israeli Foreign Ministry backed website, Hamas Massacre, for sharing a photo that was not from inside Israel. It was long predates Israel, and you traced it back to the Kurdish areas. So
I found it on other websites going back to 2022. And this is like the heart of the entire investigation, is that photo, because it has been referred to in Physicians for Human Rights' report, which is entirely based on the Israeli Commission's propaganda dissemination, and the BBC report that just came out yesterday. They both reference that photo. They don't show the photo, but they reference it. And they also reference a photo of a woman who's being taken captive into Gaza, and they say she has blood on her pelvic region. But if you actually look at the photo, she's wearing white sweatpants, and it looks like she fell on the ground in mud, and there's mud on the back of her sweatpants. But there's absolutely no evidence there.
And even if it's blood, even if it is blood, you can't look at that and say this is definitely evidence of sexual assault. It could be, but you can't look at that and say that this proves it. You just can't.
I mean, she's clothed, she's getting into a truck, and that's all that happens. And the Hamas militant also has blood, so it could have been that somebody else was killed near them.
Yeah.
But then we just have these lurid testimonies of gang rape that have emerged from one peculiar character named Yoni Sadon. This is something that Barry Weiss promoted, who's been a real
call the militant savages.
Yeah,
as she did. Yes.
So who is Yoni Sadon? Yoni Sadon. Okay, I'm responding to Barry Weiss here. She's quoting from the big investigation that led. This was obviously fueled by Kohav El-Kayam Levy's commission, the Hamas Rape Commission. And Barry Weiss is quoting this character, Yoni Sadon, who said, "I saw this beautiful woman with 8 or 10 of the fighters beating and raping her. And they were laughing, and then the last one shot her in the head." So this is at the Nova Electronic Music Festival. 10 Hamas savages pounce on one woman and they gang rape her. And they just have the time and the physical ability to do that when, as we know, there was intense crossfire, complete chaos everywhere. And at a certain point, Apache helicopters, Israeli helicopters operating in the sky.
Barry Weiss is actually not quoting it accurately, because the original quote is even more ridiculous.
Yeah.
The quote from this purported witness is actually that I saw this beautiful woman with the face of an angel being raped, which is this creepy fetishistic language. It's so obvious what they're trying to do here is conjure this image of this like angelic Israeli victim being raped by these Hamas savages. Who talks like that? If you saw someone being raped, would you describe them as a beautiful woman with the face of an angel? Is that how you would describe a rape victim? I mean,
a lot of this is just projections of lurid fantasies.
Yeah, and this is a hard issue to discuss because you never want to downplay an allegation as serious as this. But I'm sorry, it's so transparently fake, and we shouldn't be intimidated into not calling it out for the fraud that it is.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. I mean, right away, I knew they were going to do this. I knew that this was their next move. I'm not surprised at all. And I'm not afraid at all to call it out, because the whole point of this is to justify real killing of, and I'm not saying atrocities didn't take place on October 7th either.
Of course.
But this is to justify an atrocity like I've never seen in my life. So back to Yoni Sadon. Who is this guy? Do we have any evidence that he was even at the Nova Electronic Music Festival? Because it took him from October 7th to December 3rd to even reach the media with this insane allegation of witnessing 10 Hamas militants gang rape a woman. and he was found at a military base called the Camp Shura, which is has been constructed near the Israeli city of Ramleh, and it's where all the bodies are being taken and examined, including bodies of Hamas fighters, which have been presented as dead Israelis. And he was apparently found there and furnished to the Times, to the Sunday Times, the British Sunday Times. I can't find any record of him existing on social media. There's no photos of him at festival. There are three other profiles of Yoni Sadon's on Facebook and Twitter, and one of them has gone on Twitter to deny being him because so many people he describes as female investigators from all factions are reaching out to him on his Instagram account to try to get him to testify. So they can't even find, the female investigators can't even find the real Yoni Sadon. So this is just weird. And yeah.
Well, and then you have the fact also, and this is so important, like if you're going to make an allegation like this, there needs to be some evidence. First of all, there's no, as far as I understand, they've not identified a single person who claims that they were raped. So therefore, everyone who was allegedly raped on October 7th, they would have had to have been killed. They can't find a single person. Of 1,000 interviews conducted by the police initially, until this Yoni witness came along, there was only one who claimed that they witnessed a rape, and again, it was another really fantastical tale about a gang rape. And then you have this, which is just so important, and this should be acknowledged in every single story about these mass rape allegations. The Times of Israel reported over a month ago that, quote, physical evidence of sexual assault was not collected from corpses by Israel's overtaxed morgue facilities. So they're going to, first of all, so they're acknowledging that there's no surviving alleged victim of rape. So then everyone would have had to have been killed. But now they're saying of all those who were killed, there was no physical evidence collected, which is just very, how can you, if you're going to claim there's rape, you need to have physical evidence. But again, going on, morgue officials have not designated individual cases as rape because of a lack of court-compliant physical proof. So you have no alleged survivors, and you have no physical evidence. So then all you have are these alleged witnesses, one of whom has just emerged, this Yoni character who we're now talking about.
Yeah.
2 months after the fact.
Yeah.
And the head of the commission said that it might be decades before anybody who survived a sexual assault even testifies. So we have to believe this allegation now, but we might have to wait decades until anyone who survived these alleged sexual crimes even testifies about it. It's just, and then you couple that with the lack of physical evidence, you couple that with all the other frauds that Israel's been caught concocting, the beheaded babies, the baby burned in an oven, the Hamas headquarters under Al-Shifa Hospital, the fact that some witnesses are only surfacing now, 2 months later, there's at minimum ample grounds to be skeptical.
So they tell us believe Israeli women. That's their mantra now.
Believe Israeli women. Crean en las mujeres israelíes. האמינו לנשים הישראליות. לישראל אמנו.
Верьте израильским женщинам.
صدقوا النساء اليهوديات.
Believe Israeli women.
Croyez aux femmes israéliennes.
Believe Israeli women.
حرف زنان إسرائیلیرا باور کنید.
האמינו לנשים ישראליות.
Faut croire dans les femmes d'Israël.
Believe Israeli women.
Believe Israeli women.
Believe Israeli women.
האמינו לנשים ישראליות.
Believe Israeli women.
Believe Israeli women.
Believe Israeli women.
And I don't believe them, not because they're women, but because they're Israeli. And Israel just consistently lies and lies and lies so that Palestinians can die and die and die. That's just the way it's gone for my whole life. And I've just seen them lie so flagrantly over and over while our media just rolls over for them unskeptically. It's getting ridiculous. The BBC hosted as one of its key voices in its video and print report May Golan, Israel's women's empowerment minister, I knew her, who she was from her previous act as a anti-black, anti-migrant activist in South Tel Aviv who led riots and anti-migrant rallies of hooligans throughout Tel Aviv. And so I put together this video of her giving an interview to the BBC and her at one of these rallies, which was shot by my colleague and friend David Sheen. Just take a look at this. This is one of the key sources, and listen to what she's saying. I mean, just listen closely.
Burned, they were without organs, they were butchered completely, they were slaughtered to the core. You had heads roaming around, you had breasts of women roaming around, and
I just wanted to focus a bit more on the practicalities of Gaza.
It's incorrectly transcribed. It's rolling around. So heads and breasts were just rolling around everywhere. I haven't seen any documentation of that, and I don't know where that's coming from. So wait, before we go into this, the BBC's asking her about the practicalities of gathering evidence, and this is who they're asking. He's saying outside our house I see psychopaths. Nobody believes us. They call us racist. We're racist because we want to preserve our lives and sanity. So I am proud to be a racist. It's our right to be a racist. If I'm racist to preserve my life, then I'm proud. It's our right to be a racist.
Just condemn it. Just make sure that you care about what women have gone through. Make sure you care about what women are now going through when they're abducted in Gaza.
So this is the BBC's source here, is an open racist who was chanting for the deportation of Africans from Israel.
And they also cite, and one of the few photos they cite in that article is the one that I already debunked as being Kurdish fighters from prior to 2023.
Yeah,
their whole it's like the white helmets on an entirely different scale. In again weaponizing feminism to advance the mass killing of women in Gaza. And we can just go on and on. I mean, I could go on for all day about the lies that we're seeing. Pretty much, if you just have endless free time like we do, or it's like your job to pick through these lies, you'll find that every single claim either doesn't add up or is a complete fabrication or a half-baked distortion of some half-truth.
אנחנו מצטרפים לשמונה האלה, ואנחנו הולכים להיות בערך כ-12 בני ערובה, עם 40 מחבלים ששומרים עלינו. אני מקצרת לך את הסיפור,
הם מתעללים בכם?
הם לא מתעללים בנו, הם מתנהגים אלינו בצורה מאוד אנושית, זה אומר שהם שומרים עלינו. כן, מה זה אומר אנושית? שומרים עלינו, הם נותנים לנו לשתות פה ושם, שהם רואים שאנחנו בלחץ, הם מרגיעים אותנו. הייתה תחושה מאוד מאוד מפחידה, אבל אף אחד לא התנהג אלינו באלימות. למזלי, לא קרה לי את מה שאני שומעת